we might actually be seeing DeFi Summer 2.0 with AI. So let's get right into it. To give you a quick recap, if you weren't around for DeFi Summer, basically this was 2020 pandemic times. This was right at the start of that crazy bull run that started in 2020 and kind of went into 2021, 2022. And DeFi Summer at that time basically was caused by a few different variables, right? So the first variable was liquidity mining, where protocols would essentially give away their tokens to people who deposited or used their protocol, and this would lead to emissions being basically boosted, right? So whatever yield you were getting would get boosted by these APYs. And this eventually started a cycle where you had TVL come in, and because TVL was coming in, more people were buying these DeFi tokens, their value was increasing and their yields were getting higher. It was leading to this like kind of very aggressive, essentially flywheel, right? Obviously not a sustainable flywheel. Now, on top of that, you add in the composability of DeFi, and people actually for the first time really making these composable Lego blocks, right? You basically started seeing recursive loops and people combining different DeFi strategies to go and borrow some money and then go and use that USDC for something else. It basically ended up just resulting in higher yields and obviously higher risk as well. But because there was so much money coming in, and TVL grew from 1 billion to 15 billion, everything was just working, right? When you have so much TVL coming in and so many inflows, all of the degen stuff you're doing just results in price going higher, right? And nobody's really thinking about sustainability. Now, eventually, as you start getting more and more rug pulls and you have these yield farms that are just giving ridiculously high APYs into their native token, you start seeing some of those house of cards kind of falling down, right? And what that eventually led to was yields normalizing. I wouldn't say crashing, I would say yields normalized. And then obviously, as we entered the bear market in 2022, we also saw those yields come down a lot, right? Now, it was DeFi basically at full throttle, right? Like you saw all the degeneracy and extremely high yields and very risky, complex kind of different ways that people were playing around with their on-chain assets, right? And then obviously you saw the reckless side of it, which is definitely people got burned in that. But DeFi Summer, as it stands, did create a lot of the protocols that we use right now, right? Like Compound, AAVE, etc. They all started out kind of really gaining traction during this period. So to give you an illustration example, DeFi Summer basically was this period where TVL just went from 1 to 15 billion in a matter of months. And when you have that amount of money inflow, it just creates crazy amounts of wealth effects in your ecosystem, which leads to people going more and more down the risk curve. And that's essentially what happened there. Now let's talk about DeFi AI, which is the next evolution of DeFi in my personal opinion. So this is DeFi supercharged by AI, right? And in my personal opinion, I think there is a chance of it causing a renaissance in DeFi, a DeFi Summer 2.0, perhaps not as crazy, perhaps not as risk on, but I do see somewhat of this kind of flywheel effect where TVL rises and that increases yields and people are willing to go and do more risky things. So people are basically borrow at higher rates, etc., right? Like all of these yields just start going up. And what DeFi AI is essentially there's a few aspects. First is AI to optimize DeFi yields. So whether this be AI trading agents, AI yield optimization, essentially using artificial intelligence to do things humans aren't good at. These AIs are already getting pretty good yields, right? And better yields than just going and lending out on AAVE, right? Because they're able to switch between different lending protocols, they're able to optimize, and that can kind of lead to higher returns. So that's like the first variable here. The second is there's obviously like real world asset plays as well. So for example, GPU-Fi. So we'll go into that deeper as we go on. The main thing here is that AI and automation really drive smarter DeFi strategies. And instead of this just being like a rule-based automation, I think with AI, you're going to see more and more complex, emergent kind of DeFi strategies emerge, right? To recap, right? In 2020, you had DeFi Summer. Yields were like in the thousands of percents. Degens were chasing the next farm. It was crazy, right? Obviously, this didn't really last because it was unsustainable. And now we're starting to see this DeFi 2.0, which is powered by AI. And a lot of these DeFi protocols that started out in DeFi Summer, they actually become battle tested. They're much more, I guess, considered safe right now because they've gone through many years of usage. But now you're starting to see that, okay, we have all these DeFi rails built in. Now, if we combine both AI optimization of essentially DeFi strategies and DeFi protocols, but then also add in the fact that you're going to start seeing a lot of demand for capital from on-chain sources to finance GPU buyouts, right? So essentially building out data centers, because those are expensive, right? And one of the best ways to finance them is obviously crypto. Crypto is amazing at raising capital, and that's what we're seeing a lot of teams do. So we could see a combination of yield just increasing because you have, these protocols like Giza that are using AI optimization to drive yields up. You also have protocols like USD AI and GAIB that are basically providing you yield based on financing GPUs, right? So a mixture of real world assets and DeFi AI it's kind of creating higher yields across the industry. Now, obviously, there could be issues. AI agents could misbehave, hallucinate. You have obviously, you deposit capital into a protocol, you have lockups. There's still some legal uncertainty, although that's kind of going away. So there are lots of things that could go wrong. If you're exposed more onto the GPU financing side of things, then you could have issues around that as well. So there's a lot of different variables here that could be risks. But I think there are pieces here where yields are starting to go up, and I think that's going to drive up TVL. Now, let's quickly cover a few different projects building in the space. The first is USD AI. So with USD AI, you essentially are able to deposit USD and then get USD AI. You're earning yield from infra loans. Right now, I believe it's majority treasury bonds, but then there's also some GPU projects that they're financing. And then you stake USD AI to basically get USD AI, which is the stake version where you earn these rewards. And right now, USD AI is pre-TGE. They have a course reward system where you get rewarded with course for essentially depositing your capital. So essentially, USD AI, to recap, allows you exposure to real-world assets through AI infrastructure loans. So this is one of these protocols where it's kind of like GPU-Fi or AI-Fi, where essentially you're using on-chain capital to finance high-yield investments in infrastructure. And then you obviously get a good return on that. And they're doing that through a stablecoin. So this is a pretty compelling alternative to DeFi yield farming because, as you know, AI is not going anywhere. Like, you just have crazy amounts of compute and inference demand. So this is a great way for the on-chain economy to tap into that without necessarily being as exposed to, let's say, the price of Ethereum dropping by 50% and then your DeFi yield farms just kind of dying out, because this is a little bit more uncorrelated than just pure DeFi. As you can see, they're already at a 48 million TVL, probably at 50 million by the time of this video. So they're growing extremely quickly. Let's talk about GAIB. They're also tokenizing GPU yields. So they have a reward system right now where you can deposit stable coins and eventually you'll get AID. Right now, you essentially, it just stays locked and earns yield. Eventually you will get their AID stablecoin, which is the yield exposure part. But for now, if you're depositing, you're going to get spice points, which is for TG, basically their token. Just keep in mind that you're essentially locked until they end the campaign. So this is going to take a while. So don't deposit if you need that money to be liquid. The next team I want to talk about is Giza. So what they're doing is AI-powered yield optimization on stables. So essentially you deposit USDC and you're able to generate yield across a bunch of different protocols with their AI managing it. Currently, I believe their API is in the 8 to 10% range, which is pretty good, outperforms most protocols, especially considering they're using lower risk strategies. They are aiming for 15% in the future. Now, they do use some level of token emissions to drive up API. That's basically kind of how they're able to increase yield somewhat, but also just the base yield without any emissions is already higher than basically most other lending protocols. So they're obviously doing a pretty good job there. So that's another stablecoin farm if you want to earn yield on your stables while sitting comfy in them. So it's pretty good. I mean, you can't complain about 8 to 10% APYs on USDC. Now, what could result in skyrocketing yields? So one is obviously you have these incentives, whether you have the Giza native token, you have GAIB doing their spice. So these token emissions definitely do drive up APY and can add a little bit of juice to your yields. Now, the second is you could essentially start seeing more riskier strategies and AI agents utilizing looping and other kind of more risky DeFi strategies, and that could increase APY. So right now, most of these agents are quite vanilla or quite like safe. And I do think that when you have some of these agents that are employing riskier strategies, you could see higher returns. You could also see if, for example, a lot of TVL starts coming in, you could kind of start seeing the same phenomena of capital moving between farms to farm the most APY, right? That obviously happens when the market gets heated up a bit. So I could see perhaps not the same level of APYs as 2020, but I could definitely see as if we progress into a bull market, some of these AI agent teams basically leaning into some of these riskier strategies. You're going to start seeing people basically start using leverage, or maybe, start using Pendle with some of these points program as well. So you could start seeing a lot more of basically yields going up. Now, I don't think it'll be ridiculous, incredibly high yields. However, I'm already seeing yields that are much higher than what I saw in 2023 in the bear market. I'm seeing yields that are much higher than on typical lending protocols. So we're already starting to kind of see this renaissance where, to be honest, being able to earn 10, 12%, even 20, 30% on your stables is pretty damn good. So let's hope for DeFi Summer 2.0. And then hopefully not only do our tokens go up because, our stables are being used more effectively, but also the actual DeFi tokens go up. So whatever rewards we get kind of get juiced up even more. And yeah, that's how we could see a DeFi Summer 2.0. So thanks for watching this video, guys. This is brought by Crescendo, my go-to-market agency for AI teams. We work with a ton of top AI teams like Aether, Zero Gravity, BitRobot, and tons of other teams. And then if you're just a regular viewer, please subscribe on YouTube or just like this video if you're seeing this on X or LinkedIn. Thanks for watching once again.